Welcome to this summary and review of the book America's Secret Establishment, An Introduction to the Order of Skull and Bones, written by Professor Antony C. Sutton. This book was first published in 1983, reprinted again in 1986, and yet again in 2002. What I'm going to do is give a little bit of biographical information about the author of the book. I'm going to talk briefly about his thesis and supporting arguments, very briefly about the topics from the table of contents in this book, and then I'm going to try to summarize the main ideas from the first part of the book, followed by some comment and critique and analysis, and ending with some questions for further study and thought. Antony C. Sutton was a research fellow at the Hoover Institute, Stanford University, from 1968 to 1973. He was an economics professor at California State University at Los Angeles. He wrote a series of books that have been largely suppressed in our society, and he had a very difficult time getting his books published for the reasons that you will see if you follow this series of books, because Professor Sutton uncovered some very unpleasant things about the funding behind groups such as the Soviet Union, as well as the rise of Hitler, also including Franklin D. Roosevelt. So I'll be covering all of those in future videos. But today I would like to start with this book because this is probably the one that impacted me the most and encouraged me to start digging deeper into the history of secret societies in the United States and in the world. This book is about a secret society that was established at Yale University, to which only the elite are initiated. It was originally incorporated as the Russell Trust in 1856, and it was a German order. An American chapter of it, Chapter 322, was founded at Yale University in 1833 by General William Huntington Russell and by Alphonso Taft, who was the father of our President William Howard Taft, who was the only president to also be Chief Justice of the United States. The members of the Order of Skull and Bones are carefully selected and initiated. They are the elite. Most are from the Eastern Seaboard. Originally, all were white Anglo-Saxon Protestants and male. And they come from old-line American families of great wealth, such as Rockefeller, Pillsbury, Harriman, and Taft, to name a few. The symbol of the society is the skull and crossbones, the same one found on pirate ships. The pirate flag reflects the connection to the history of drug smuggling going back to the 1860s during the time of the Civil War. And I will be uncovering the whole history of the British East India Company and the Opium Wars and the connection with Skull and Bones in a book that I will review called Dope, Inc. That will be coming down the line. So the Society of the Skull and Bones is also called the Brotherhood of Death, and in the inner private clubhouse of the society is a mysterious room 322. This number has great occult significance. Most people would not be aware of this, and there are various theories about what the chapter 322 means. However, because I've done a very in-depth study of the occult, both light and dark, I know that 322, or March 22nd, is the beginning of the satanic season of sacrifice, and Dr. Sutton did find a lot of satanic symbolism, which I will review in the last part of the book when I get that far. Sutton wrote previous books on how the West built the Soviet Union, only to create an enemy and try to destroy it. And he also wrote a book on how Wall Street funded Hitler's rise to power, as well as funding FDR's presidency and rise to power. In the introductory part of this book, Sutton says even though he investigated all those other matters and proved their truth, he didn't know the why of any of it. until he received an anonymous donation of an 8-inch package of documents in the early 1980s. It was the membership list and supporting documents for the Yale Skull and Bones Society. Sutton pored over these documents, and this book came out of that research. Sutton writes that this book represents his magnum opus because in writing it, he was able to piece together the reasons why, in his words, the West built the Soviets and Hitler, why we go to war to lose, why Wall Street loves Marxists and Nazis, why the kids can't read, why the churches have become propaganda founts, why historical facts are suppressed, why politicians lie, and 100 other whys. So you're probably starting to get a little bit of a reason why his books have been suppressed. All right, moving on to the topics from the table of contents. The book is divided into 4 parts: an introduction to the order, which I'll be covering today, how the order controls education, how the order controls war and revolution, and finally, the secret cult of the order. The summary of the main ideas that I found to be interesting from the first part of this book are that the philosophy of Skull and Bones is what is called the Hegelian philosophy. Under the Hegelian dialectic theory, it is essential to have conflict, because out of the clash of opposites comes synthesis or change, hence a new world order. So you must have conflict. You must create 2 sides, pit them against one another, and then out of that clash of opposites comes the order or the change that you want to bring about. And in this new world order, the state is all-powerful and absolute, and individuals are submerged into the collective. The common man can only find freedom if he or she obeys the state. And Sutton believes that the order controls the state. He says that Hegelian philosophy glorifies the state, and the state is all-powerful. Another word for this is statism. Whereas in classical liberalism, the state is always submissive to the individual person. In Hegelianism, it's the other way around. In a statist system, no matter if it's Nazism or Marxism, the state is always supreme over the individual, and the individual's job is only to serve the state. There is no individuality apart from allegiance to the state. And of course, this is the opposite of what we are taught by official establishment history, because according to that perspective, history is nothing but a random, accidental series of happenings. The other side of this coin is the conspiratorial viewpoint of history, that is, that historical events occur by design for reasons that are not generally made known to the masses of people. Hence, the reason why the books of Antony Sutton would be suppressed. Sutton concludes from his research that the order, as he calls it, has penetrated virtually all areas of American society, and its members exercise great influence in all of these different areas. He talks about these areas as being the White House, legislatures, the education system, media, publishing, banking, tax-free foundations, think tanks, business, commerce, industry, law, legislatures, even churches. Initiates of the order, once they graduate from Yale, are assured of career advancement, a lot of success, and a lot of money and wealth if they follow the rules. There are horizontal and vertical chains of influence, and the order, therefore, can tap into any occupational area in society that it wants to. One of the things that Sutton really stresses is that the order is responsible for the dumbing down of the American educational system. Why? Because members of the order brought the Prussian educational system to the United States, which I'll have a lot more to say about later. And in addition, John Dewey, who's promoted as such a great father of education, was a staunch collectivist and statist. And he was instrumental in pushing the idea that the whole purpose of public school education is to make the students indoctrinated into the system of society. Of course, he doesn't use the word indoctrination, but he says that education is a process of living and not a preparation for future living. And to me, that would seem quite contrary to the purpose of education, because the purpose of education should be the development of the individual, not creation of cogs in the state machine. Sutton also points out that the two political parties in the United States, the so-called right and left, are nothing but a control device to divide and conquer the population. He says the order uses the Hegelian dialectic principle to foment war and revolution. Why? In the interest, again, of creating a new world order, and this is for the benefit of only a few and to the detriment of many. The order hoped to bring about this change in all of the following elements of society. They wanted to change education, money, law, politics, the economy, history, psychology, philanthropy, medicine, religion, media. And in order to do this, members of the order, after they graduate, are put in very high and influential positions within many of these fields. The order is a highly secretive organization, and its practices include bizarre occult rituals, especially during the initiation of new members. The ritual aspects are notably satanic, and Sutton uses the word satanic and talks about the symbolism, which I'll get to in the last part of the book review. Members are sworn to strict vows of secrecy. So that pretty much sums up what the first section of this book is about. So now I'm going to offer some comment and critique and analysis, things that I thought about after I read this book. First, a good number of U.S. politicians belonged to or did belong to this secret society when they were alive. The list includes names like George McBundy, who was the advisor to John F. Kennedy and had a huge impact on the evolution of the Vietnam War, President George Herbert Walker Bush, President George W. Bush, William F. Buckley Jr., Stephen Mnuchin, who was Trump's Department of Secretary Treasury, and John Kerry, former Secretary of State and Senator from Massachusetts. I can certainly attest to the fact that the adoption of the Prussian education system and Dewey's philosophy of education are entrenched in the U.S. public school system. There, students are not taught about the importance of individualism and individual rights as stressed by the founders of this country. Instead, the collective group is stressed, and students are taught to continually look to the government as a solution to the country's problems. This, of course, is contrary to the Jeffersonian idea of the best government is the least government. The motto of the order is the end justifies the means, and I certainly can see that is apparent in the actions of the U.S. government, especially with regard to foreign policy issues such as war and empire building. There has been no emphasis on this organization in the mainstream media. The only article written about it is one that Sutton cites from Esquire magazine that was written in September 1977. It was written by a man by the name of Ron Rosenbaum, and there's a particularly interesting quote from this article about how members are initiated into the order. He says that when a new member is initiated in the order, quote, "Tonight he will die to the world and be born again into the order, as he thenceforth will refer to it. The order is a world unto itself in which he will have a new name and 14 new blood brothers, also with new names," end quote. I found this very interesting because of the connection that it has to the ancient Egyptian occult rites that I've studied. The Skull and Bones building at Yale is known as the Tomb, and the ritual practiced by the annual crop of 15 initiates is an Osiris cult death and resurrection ritual, whereby the Osiris, or castrated bull cult, is one of the 3 subdivisions of the Isis mother cult. So I found it very interesting that this group of people was so into these Egyptian initiation rites. Students in the public education system need to be properly educated on the foundational principles of our constitutional republic. The founders never wanted to create an all-powerful centralized state. They never wanted to create democracy, which they thought of as mob rule. So the idea that they would be okay with a collectivist system that centralizes control would never fit with what form of government they set up, because collectivist systems require powers that our Constitution simply does not grant to government. In a constitutional republic, power is diffused, not centralized. If students were to understand this, maybe they would not be so willing to surrender their individual rights to an all-powerful collectivist government and buy into the cultural Marxism that is becoming a very large part of our educational system. To wrap up, some questions to think about. First, why do the same names keep coming up in the American political system? Bush, Clinton, etc. What is the likelihood, for example, statistically, that both a father and a son, who were both members of this order, would eventually become president of the United States? Second, why do the members of the order wield such influence in American society, especially when most Americans know nothing about this organization? And finally, what are the connections between the Skull and Bones Society and the Council on Foreign Relations? Curtis Dahl, who was the son-in-law of Franklin D. Roosevelt, said in his book, My Exploited Father-in-Law, that first he thought the ideas of Franklin D. Roosevelt were his own ideas, but later he learned that they were merely formulated and given to him by organizations like the Council on Foreign Relations. So I would like to know, what is the tie between the Council of Foreign Relations and the Order of Skull and Bones? That's it for part 1. See you back for part 2, where I will talk about how the order controls education.